Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 145, and today we're going to talk to Ed Hoefer about various topics. Ed is a jack of all trades when it comes to not cultural knowledge and stuff. I mean, he knows a lot about a lot, and that's why he's a great guest. That's why he's the first person to be on this show 3 times. How are you, Ed?
I'm great, Chris. Thank you for having me back on. I always enjoy talking to to you. Good conversation.
It's always been a good talk. We're going to talk about various cultural aspects. We're going to talk about, Norman Lear. We're going to talk about Aayan Hirsi Ali and her recent announcement that she's going to become a Christian, and some other various things happening right now in the world. We just like to go over some various topics. Ed, I found this whole thing with Aayan Hirsi Ali. She started out, being raised in Somalia and being in what was probably a very brutal Islamic environment. I mean, with abuse.
Well, the brutal Islamic environment didn't start until she was in her early teens. Okay. Before that, she was pretty westernized, or at least liked going to the mall and watching movies and doing things that typical Westerners do. And then when, I want to say, the Muslim Brotherhood came in and they said, you either do this or we kill you, everybody did what they were told.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. I wasn't so Somalia, it wasn't until the Muslim Brotherhood that Somalia went total barbarian.
Well, at least wherever she was. I mean, just from listening to her interviews, she talked about how things didn't get really intense until the Muslim Brotherhood rolled in.
Which also happened to be, at the time she was starting to, become a woman, so to speak. Maybe and of course I believe she was in an arranged marriage and things like that. It was a very, very misogynistic culture.
She wasn't actually in an arranged marriage. She was put on a plane to go to an arranged marriage, and there was a layover in Belgium. I want to say it was Belgium. And she got off the plane and told the authorities what was going on, and she said, is there anything you can do? And they said, you could stay here. And so she stayed there.
Yeah, born in 1969, and of course got the female genital mutilation, which is a common problem. And then, she ended up, formed Somalia, and then this is according to Wikipedia. And then her father was in prison, and looks like, she actually did wear a hijab for a while.
When she ended up in Europe, the first time she took the hijab off, she was very concerned that she would be physically assaulted by men out on the street.
Yeah. She ended up in the Netherlands in 1992. So that's, and got political asylum. Yeah. So, and then she got her working for various think tanks. She was the September 11th World Trade Center. That was really something that started to take the red pill, so to speak, in her case, of leaving Islam.
It was a tough time. Time for everybody, but especially a Muslim living in Europe.
Yes, it was.
From her family and not really fitting in super well in Europe.
And she's also 6 languages: English, Somali, Arabic, Swahili, Amharic, and Dutch. Yeah, that's quite impressive. She's got to be a very smart lady.
It's pretty well rounded. Yeah.
And then after that, she read the Atheist Manifesto, and she gave up religion and renounced Islam, and said she didn't believe in God in 2002. And I've noticed that sometimes when a lot of people leave a church, they tend to go very far. They tend, the pendulum swings way far the other way. They don't just go to the middle, and I think that's maybe what happened with her. So she went.
Yeah, you lose your moorings. It's
Oh
like
yeah,
you're on a boat that's tied up at a dock, and then you cut the ropes, and then you just float
yeah.
off.
And I think sometimes
You had a
there's
really
often,
rough time.
yeah, I think so there's often some anger. You feel betrayed because you feel like it was something that wasn't really honest. She wrote that, and then there was that movie, short movie Submission, and that she worked on with Theo Van Gogh, and of course Theo Van Gogh, of course, was murdered in 2004. Yeah, wow. So that was a um, murdered by some terrorists, and that person got sentenced to a pretty heavy sentence too, which does not happen very often. You know, that was the whole. They wanted to send a message in this case. It's interesting too. I wonder.
Well,
I
it
wonder
was
what
very
kind of.
heinous crime.
Yeah, yeah. The killer got life in prison, and they don't give life sentences very often. But yeah, yeah. And she said, she was very concerned about, the wrote another letter, with the cartoon the so-called cartoon Trump controversy. It was all the way back in 2006. Wow, yeah, so, yeah,
Yeah, she had a really rough go, and
yeah,
when she recently made her recent announcement, I was a little surprised, but not very, especially after reading it. It seems more
yeah,
like it was a strategic decision rather than some kind of spiritual experience.
yeah,
It sounds like she sat down and thought about it and said, oh, well, maybe we need to have religion in the world, and I want to pick this one. It didn't
yeah,
sound very charismatic to me.
yeah. She found her way to the American Enterprise Institute in 2006 and became a U.S. citizen in 2013. And the American Enterprise Institute is definitely one of the more right wing think tanks, uh, where they talk about a lot of different things.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And then in 2016, she gets labeled an extremist by that wonderful Southern Poverty Law Center. Yes, of course. They just love to. They just love to side with the barbarians, don't they? Trust me, I know people are on that list, and uh,
Oh,
it's meaningless. But yeah, yeah. And
I
this
don't
is,
usually pay too much attention to.
yeah, yeah. These are just highlights. Yeah, she doesn't really like. She's very much open and just. For example, in 2007, just like Nazism started with Hitler's vision, the Islamic vision is a caliphate, a society ruled by Sharia law in which women who have sex before marriage are stoned to death, homosexuals are beaten, and apostates like me are killed. It's inimical to liberal democracy as Nazism. I mean, she said we're at war with Islam, so there was always a. She definitely was, and I think she definitely found more allies among conservatives who, of course, wanted to have reasons to justify their wars against the Middle East, and in particular Arabic or Islamic countries. So that went that way. I don't. Part of the war on terror, especially with. Uh, but then she comes out. But just recently she was. Oh yeah, she was married to. She married Niall Ferguson. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, the British historian. So.
Very interesting man, too.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchinson called her the most important public intellectual probably ever to come out of Africa. So, yeah. Of course, she
Big claim, and we'll see.
also been criticized by the Council for Islamic Relations and infidel and quite a few other things. But it's very interesting that in November, last month she decides that she's going to become a Christian, and this was kind of shocking for some people, and I'm wondering, I wonder if she's told the whole story here. What do you think?
Well, I think she made it pretty clear in her statement. There wasn't a conversion like Saul on the road to Damascus, seeing a vision of Jesus telling him not to persecute his church. You don't have a Joseph Smith style first vision where God appears, or Muhammad being taken to a mountain on a flying horse. She just said, atheism isn't working in the fight against Islam, so I'm going to join Christianity, is
Yep.
essentially the message that I got from it. And that seemed pretty clear to me. It sounded like a logical, rational decision made for geopolitical motives.
Yeah, and this is often what happens in politics. Some people are motivated more by what they're for, and some are motivated more by what they're against. And I also think that often phil, political people, or even people who are philosophers, and she's probably more of a philosopher. They're always searching for meaning. Why did these weird things happen when I was growing up? Why does something like September 11th happen? And you try to look for meaning, and then you also try to figure out ways to correct it so it doesn't happen again. It's the same way. Ayn Rand's philosophy was a reaction to what she saw with the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian Civil War. It's a
Well, in a
I
lot
mean,
of cases, people
yeah.
who experience that kind of trauma tend to overcorrect and they
Oh
go too
yes,
far in the other direction because they're traumatized. When you're traumatized by some kind of horrific event, then it's harder to think rationally about it and very, very easy to go too far in the opposite direction.
yeah. Oh yes, and then seeing that and I think also, but a lot of the atheist movement also, though, I do remember 20 years ago, the most militant people against Islam were atheists, and in particular objectivists. I mean, that they're barbarians, they're less than us, we should just go in there. And I mean, I remember objectivists saying nuke Mecca and stuff like that. It was
It's a
very
little
quite
extreme.
yeah, yeah. So it was a
Although in the 2000s, that was a fairly common refrain among people on both sides of the political aisle as well. It wasn't just objectivists or little niche groups. You had Republicans and Democrats wanting to go a little overboard with the U.S. Army there. And
yeah.
well, we did. I don't know exactly how much we spent, $5-10 trillion,
Yes.
and we didn't seem to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting how they certainly find ways to make war more and more expensive. She wrote this essay, "Why I'm Not a Christian," by Bertrand Russell, and ended up coming here. And then of course, back on October 7th, we had this incident, where where some people were attacked, in Israel, near the Gaza Strip, by Hamas. Uh, we don't know all the details, but there was definitely a lot of anger suddenly among, especially conservatives and other groups that want to just go for the war on Islam again. And I jokingly say, Hamas's greatest accomplishment was they ended the war in Ukraine.
Well, that wasn't going very well either.
Yeah,
So hopefully the killing stops in
yeah,
both places soon.
I hope so too. But it's just ever since this whole thing with Israel happened, that disappeared from the television. Just about.
Yes,
It's funny.
the spotlight, you don't know how long it's going to stay on you, so you need to make hay while the sun shines. And Ukraine wasn't able to turn the corner on Russia in time. And
Yeah,
now we are on to a new topic.
and it was also
Anything
interesting. I'm sorry.
anything to keep the attention away from our own problems at home.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how this happened almost quite quickly after the incident with that Ukrainian in the Canadian Parliament, and they were cheering him on, and somebody said, "Oh wait, this guy actually fought against the Soviet Union, and therefore allied himself with the Nazis." Oh, we can't. It seemed, yeah, I don't know if this was a coincidence, but boy, it seems kind of weird sometimes the way this stuff happens.
I got the impression that it was a clown show from
Yeah.
beginning to end.
Well,
and when you're talking about politics, that's usually a pretty good guess.
Well, I certainly have enough knowledge to know that there were monsters on both sides in World War II. Hitler was a monster and Stalin was a monster, and some people thought that Stalin was the worst monster. So yes, they ended up aligning themselves with Hitler. It's not hard to understand why they did that. But yeah, and I suppose this whole attack probably was at least partially a catalyst for Ayaan converting to Christianity, because she sees again, hey, we got to fight this Islam. We got to fight Islam and go for it. But it's interesting too that she suddenly decided that atheism wasn't really working in the fight against Islam. I think she's she points out the resurgence of great power authoritarianism and expansionism, mentioning Putin's Russia and the Chinese Communist Party, and also the woke ideology, though, which is definitely undercutting Western civilization. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting angles that we could look at this from, and I think that you're onto something when you say that she did this in response to, for instance, the October 7th attack, along with probably a fair amount of ambivalence toward the new atheists and the direction the atheist movement has taken since she moved to the West.
Yeah, as much as we're pro reason people. We're for logic and we're for the Enlightenment. But we all have to agree. We all have to agree though that Christianity is a significant part of Western civilization. It's had a lot of influence on Western civilization. It's influenced a lot of important people in the history of the West. And even and science did not always have this adversarial relationship either. I mean, take Joseph Priestley. The man who discovered oxygen. He was also a clergyman. It wasn't unusual.
The Big Bang came out of the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Probably until the beginning of the Enlightenment, most of the research, most scientific research, was conducted by priests or funded by the church. And it wasn't until Galileo, really, where the splits began. And that was just the beginning of the splits. The split didn't really occur until the Enlightenment.
Yes, and of course, still, the almost all the colleges and the universities were affiliated with the church of some type. So there was definitely a union of, the church and the school, and the school as we know it all, often had its origins in teaching the next generation of priests to be priests. I mean, that's
learning how to read so you can read the Bible.
Exactly. Yes, learning how to read, and it's I mean, we cannot deny the influence that religion had on so many different things. I mean, another thing too that was interesting. There was this church in Nagorno-Karabakh, which is where the Armenian alphabet was developed by this saint in Armenia, and it was falling under control of Azerbaijan, and some people were very upset about that, just because that had so much influence on the culture of Armenia, which was the first Christian nation. I mean, and I think Christianity's had its problems, but it's generally probably been a net good for Western civilization. I don't know if you created a parallel timeline without it. I mean, I don't. It's hard to say, really. It's the Dark Ages were
without Christianity, paganism would have continued.
Yeah,
and pagans were not very kind to themselves or anybody else.
And there's also the possibility, that maybe Islam would have taken over, or something else would have taken over as well, and moved in to fill that gap. But I do think, Aquinas and some of that other Enlightenment thinkers were important, though, and most of them, certainly Locke considered himself a Christian, and so did Algernon Sidney. And
Well, if we could take a minute and look at the religious evolution in Europe, it's actually quite fascinating. When you look at Constantine in 300 AD, so you have Jesus born right around 0 AD, and Constantine makes Jesus his patron around 300 AD. And in that 300 years, there was a lot of turmoil going on in the empire. There were a lot of civil wars. There were a lot of wars with the surrounding empires and the German tribes in the north, the Germanic tribes in the north. And by the time Constantine came along, the people in the Roman Empire were so tired of the constant civil war, the constant revenge, the constant killing. They just wanted to live in peace in a lot of cases. And one of the main reasons why Constantine gained a lot of power was because when he approached a city, he told them very clearly that he was not their enemy, even if they were fighting him. In one instance, a city sends out cavalry to fight him, and they're so heavily outnumbered that Constantine has his troops use wooden sticks to knock the other side off their horses and not actually kill them. And after one or two cities saw that they would be treated well, when Constantine showed up with his armies, they just opened the gates and let him in. And this whole idea of being kind and being a little soft
Yeah.
towards your enemies was very compatible with the Christians. And I think Constantine adopted the growing Christian movement because he saw it as being a more effective way to gain the loyalty of the citizens of the empire. And it worked so well for him that I think that's where Roman Catholicism really took off and
Yeah.
shaped the continent for the next 1,000 years.
This is something else too. If you conquer people but treat them well, they might say, well, yeah, this might be better off. I mean, during the last 3 years, I've said it many times that if we have if we have a spaceship show up and there's another race from another planet that wants to come and take over Earth, there's no question in my mind that I'll collaborate with them because they can't run things any worse than the way things have been run by the Earthlings have done it. They can't
Well,
possibly
that's
do
a
it.
solid argument.
Yeah, I mean, I said, yeah, sure, you want to take over, because maybe that was also what happened too in some ways. With the America going to Germany and going into Japan, is that they treated them fairly well. So you said, yeah, let's take this up. So yeah, so we get to this, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Yeah, I definitely think that atheist movement is it's really become kind of bankrupt, and you get something here like this is from the prominent atheist Matt Dillahunty. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is now a Christian, not because there's evidence for their truth, but because her time as an atheist failed to combat her nihilism, and she feels the utility of Christianity can better combat woke ideology and Islamism. Not remotely surprised. And
Yeah, I don't remember her saying anything about nihilism in her report, so it
yeah,
sounds like he's pushing some other agenda than
well,
actually
he
affirming
is.
what she said.
Yeah, and this is the important thing. I realized that while she was an atheist, she wasn't a humanist and was primarily looking for a way to combat Islamism. I mentioned this to another person at the time. Humanism and right wing thinking just don't go together, and because of that, she wasn't ever going to find a good fit with the broader atheist community. And,
Well, I don't know really what to say about that
yeah,
because the left and the right are so intimately connected to religious thought and religious ideology and explicit religiosity that I can't really say that it's owned by one side
yeah,
or the other. Right now, the right wing appears to be more Christian than the left wing. But if you look at the people voting Democrat in the United States, many of them are Christians. And many of them very much hold on to their Christian beliefs. If anything, the left is just a little more ambivalent about what kind of religion it wants to push. And that's kind of
Yes, I
consistent
agree. Yeah.
with the left-wing ethos.
Yeah, that's definitely what I would say. And it looks like to me they've got this issue where, I mean, basically, when you say humanism, and it's always been just another word for communism or wokeism or progressivism, they, and that's why if you hold any position that's contrary to that, they're shocked because they don't want to pretend that such people exist. Whether you're in favor of gun rights or whatever, it's just insane for them. But
Well,
yeah,
humanism to me has always seemed to be a movement without any real direction or leadership. And
yeah,
I'm not criticizing humanism. I mean, the basic foundation of humanism seems pretty solid to me. It just doesn't seem to have a coherent direction or a plan. And so anybody with a coherent direction or a plan who comes into the movement and is accepted there can just steer it any way they want to go.
yeah. Well, there's always been, yeah. I think it's always had a. There's definitely something that's interesting too, because the whole because there's a desire for, I think, some humanists to just, as they call it. I mean, who isn't a humanist in the sense that you're not? I mean, you're for humanity, right? You're for humans. I mean, unless you really
Oh,
hate humans. I mean, unless you're a misanthrope. I mean,
if you go back to the Greeks or even further back, 13,000 years ago, most tribes, I don't know about most, but many tribes defined themselves as the real humans. And everybody who was not in our tribe is not really human.
yeah,
And like the Yupik in Alaska, Yupik means real people. And the Greeks, the Yupiks, the Romans, basically everybody felt like, hey, if you're not part of our society, then you're not actually human, so we can do whatever we want to you. So when somebody says, oh, humanism isn't compatible with this group over here, they're following a time honored tradition that's more than 13,000 years old. Oh, those people over there aren't really human. So it's nothing new. It's more than 13,000 years old. Except today in the United States, you have less of a risk of experiencing genocide because somebody says you're not really human.
yes, that's true. I mean, it's very interesting, and there's a part of me though that just wants to say too, and I think a lot of these things are somewhat personal. Is who in the atheist community pissed her off, and I imagine it could be several, if not just one
I would
person.
say it was a whole community.
Yeah, I
I,
mean,
I think it would be the abject failure of
yeah,
atheism to have any kind of a serious or significant coherent influence on society.
yeah, it's had none. And there was also this quote, where Michael Malice said, that it doesn't really. I mean, crusading atheism doesn't really provide anything. It's just saying, it's like, I mean, imagine, if you had a movement that said, don't believe in astrology or don't believe in, or don't believe in tarot cards or don't, and that was the sole, that was your sole part of your movement. It's not really, I mean, atheism isn't really that much different. I mean, what does it offer you?
It's a protest movement.
Yeah, it's a
It,
protest.
it's a protest movement, and it follows a tradition that goes back to at least Martin Luther, where I mean the
Yeah.
Protestants are literally protesting against the Catholics. And with the
Yeah.
Protestants, at least, they had a mission where they wanted to bring back real Christianity. And so they actually had a positive purpose. With atheism and many isms, there's a lot less coherent of a plan. And so if your goal is simply to promote a lack of belief in God, that's just harder to rally around than, hey, let's make sure everybody knows how to read. I mean, if you teach somebody how to read, they can go and teach somebody else how to read, and then they both have a better life for it. If you teach somebody to abandon their faith in God, sometimes that helps them. With Ayaan Hirsi Ali, with me, that was very useful. With other people, though, not so much.
Yeah, and I don't, I know one guy who spent a long, and I had him on the show, and he spent a long time in jail, Michael Leibowitz, but he actually got into Ayn Rand, and and his friend did too, and they said Ayn Rand really did help turn his life around. But you don't hear very many, people say, "My life turned around once I became an atheist." I mean, you do hear stories of people saying, "My life got better once I adopted this religion." They might say, like I was an alcoholic, but then I started going to church every day, and I stopped drinking. It's and I think if if you're having
When
addiction,
people have left religion,
yeah,
I've talked to a lot of people who have left religion, and the way it typically goes is you leave religion, you're disoriented, you don't know what to believe or how to act, and so you explore a lot of things. You explore the atheist movement, you explore humanism, you explore different political groups, and then you figure out where you fit, and then you just get on with your life. And right when you leave religion, then there's this affinity for atheism. And the longer you're out of religion and you see that, oh, okay, I can eat pork now, or I can, for Mormons, I can drink coffee or beer or something. And as you figure out how to integrate into society, you just walk away from the movements. And then there are people who stay in the movements, and some of them have trouble letting go. And you end up accumulating these people who haven't figured out how to fit in, and they can cause a little bit of discord sometimes. There are some people in atheist movements who are genuinely trying to accomplish something good. Like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I think as an atheist, she wanted to accomplish something that she thought was good. Bring more secularism into the world, a little bit of reform to Islam. And when that didn't work, she is now pivoting into something else. Most people just get on with their lives and stop being activists when they get disappointed by atheism.
yeah, and I've certainly seen people leave the atheist movement for various reasons. I know one woman who gave up on the atheist movement largely because a lot of weird sexual things happen with her, and it does tend to be it does tend to be a heavily male movement, so sometimes the women do get a lot more attention than they might want. Uh, yeah,
And you're more vulnerable when you're transitioning. When you don't know what to believe, you're more vulnerable to people who might have an agenda.
yes, you are. Yeah, no, and I think this might lead to cults. It does sound like she's at least she's at least. It sounds like though she probably maybe was pondering this for a while. Because I know some people out there. I make the joke about him. Well, if you don't like what he believes right now, just wait 5 minutes. Uh, they literally go from movement to movement, and I've known quite a few. She's not the only story though. In the past few years, I've heard though of people just quitting the atheism and going elsewhere. Although quite a few of them were actually going to Orthodox Christianity. She didn't really say what sect of Christianity she was going to. She just said, "I'm a Christian."
Well, there's a lot of noise going around about people becoming Christian, and the numbers on the ground don't bear that out. There are a few high profile people who are adopting Orthodox Christianity or general Christianity, and there are some people who are low profile who are doing the same thing. There are far more people leaving Christianity and minimizing their belief than there are people who are joining. I mean, it's pretty big. The difference is very large.
Yes,
Now
it's
they're not;
definitely
these
is.
people aren't leaving and joining an act. Say that again.
They're not leaving and joining a what?
They're not leaving and joining another movement. They're not joining an atheist group or the Satanic Church any of or any of a number of different ideological groups. Most people, when they
Yes.
leave religion, they just see that life has so much to offer that why would they join a group? You know, I've got my friends, I've got
Yeah.
my family, I've got my career, I've got these things that bring meaning into my life.
Yeah.
I don't need to have somebody else tell me what to think and feel.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people maybe get involved with, because this is one thing that happens when you leave the church, you often lose that social aspect of it because church can provide a social aspect. I mean,
Yeah,
I've
and
joking,
a lot of people still feel that loss down the road.
yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard people jokingly say, that Unitarian Universalist is just church for atheists. You know,
In many cases, it is. I've been to a few uh, meetings for them, and they are very compatible with atheism and secularism and humanism. They tend to be pretty left wing. They still bring
yeah,
in people who disagree with them and have some pretty spirited conversations at times.
yeah,
So I didn't keep going because I didn't find anything particularly useful there. I did see that, hey, this would be more interesting to me than the church services that I'd been to in the
yeah.
past. If I didn't have friends, if I moved to a new city by myself, starting over and just left everybody behind, I might go to a Unitarian meeting or two to meet a couple of people because it'd be fun.
Yeah, I know. I think that's one thing, and yeah, I'm curious. Are those debates? Do they stay civil and courteous, or they usually devolve into name calling and people just
Oh
acting
well,
like jerks?
there's a reason why Unitarian Universalist congregations don't grow very large. Uh, a, a lot of people do get offended and stop coming, or they chase other people out. I don't know a whole lot about it because I only went to a couple of meetings,
Yeah,
but from what I saw and the people that I talked to, it sounded like they're having the same problem other religious or religious like groups are having. People are just, I mean, the biggest threat to organized religion is a good paying job. And it always has been. It always has been. Religion takes hold much stronger in communities where there's a lot of poverty and a hard time having gainful employment. And good jobs, that's one of the biggest problems with religion. And many religious scholars and leaders have known that for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, which is where the ascetic movements come in.
why do you think that is?
Religion is there to give you solace when your life sucks. If you've got a
Yes,
good job, if you've got a good stable job and you got a house and you got a family and you got friends and a place in the community, you don't have you don't need as much solace. Sometimes you do, but you don't need it every single day. You need
yeah,
it when something bad happens. But when you, for instance, if you live in the United States, yes, something bad can happen to me. Something bad can happen to you. 9/11 didn't happen to me, and I don't think it happened to you either. I knew a few people who it happened to,
yeah,
but for me, it was just something on TV that was very shocking to the entire country. But it didn't happen to the country, it happened to a few tens of thousands of people and their
yeah.
families. And
I
in a country of 300 million, I mean, that's very, very tiny. But then
Yeah,
World War II happened to all of Germany, happened to all of Europe. And it didn't it
happened. Yeah.
only happened to the Americans who went over as soldiers.
Well, that yeah, and their families, of course. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I mean, my dad had a lot of cousins who fought in World War II, and
Yeah.
and one of them, and there were always lots of stories, and one of them later had some issues with alcoholism and ended up taking himself out, and just in a horrible way to do it. But there were a lot of things that happened there. It was I mean, and yeah, I do know I did know one person who got out of the World Trade Center alive. He wouldn't even go back to Manhattan for like a month or something. He was just so really upset.
Well,
but yeah,
here's the closest that I got to it at the time. I mean, I lived in New York for a while, so I met a lot of people there
yeah,
who had been through it. When 9/11 happened, I was working with a woman whose son, well, she was from Vietnam,
yeah,
and she had escaped Vietnam during the Vietnam War when the
yes,
Americans relieved her. She lost her husband during the war, and she and her son escaped. And then her son joined the military, and he was late for work on 9/11, and he watched a plane fly in to the Pentagon and kill everybody he worked with. So that's the closest that I got to it,
yeah,
and that's still pretty far away.
yeah. I had a you know strangely enough, I actually do have a distant cousin who this was closer to me though, who survived 3 bullets from Cho at Virginia Tech.
Wow,
Wasn't
that's
quite as many people, but yes, yeah, she survived. There were people who got shot and survived. Yeah,
yeah. But having a job
yeah,
and a stable community means you experience fewer tragedies
yeah,
than, for instance, people living in the Roman Empire. I mean, no matter where you lived in the Roman Empire, even if you were in the city of Rome itself, you saw horrible tragedy all the time. If in no other way than just seeing slavery constantly,
yes,
and
yeah,
people starving to death, people dying from horrible diseases. I mean, today we
yes,
live in such a clean, sanitary, healthy world that we don't know what it was like. We don't know what it's like in Afghanistan today. I mean, even people who go there on tour in the military, they don't know what it's like to grow up like that and live like that
yeah.
culturally.
People on military bases don't hardly see anything about what really goes on in a country. They're on the military base. It's an artificial
Yeah.
environment. I mean,
Yeah, and
you
even if you're in there, even if you go into those communities and you
yeah,
get to know everybody and hear their
yeah,
stories, it's very different because you're an outsider coming in. It's not like you were born into it and you knew that your family has been there for thousands of years and those pesky Westerners have been messing with you since
yeah,
Alexander the Great and even further back, really. But Alexander the Great was when the modern world really broke out into the
yes.
East.
That was also the beginning, the first time that an empire went to Afghanistan to die.
Yes, and we keep doing it.
Yeah, and that's what happened. He got to Afghanistan, and that was all over. And it's very but we're kind of drifting here. But this is what I definitely understand where Ayaan Hirsi Ali is coming from there because there seems to be a lot more. I don't know if there's more drama, but I know how much. I can safely say that all my times in the libertarian movement, I have never had any crazy drama or silly drama with the libertarian Christians. I mean, they know I don't go to church, but we can work together on a project or even go to an event and have a good time and have civil conversations.
Have I told you my theory about libertarian Christians?
What is your theory about them?
I think most libertarian Christians come from fairly authoritarian religious backgrounds,
Yes,
Catholic, Mormon, or a Baptist group that is very
yes,
strict. And they feel like they've had enough authoritarian boot from their religious tradition and they don't want it from politics. And so when they come to
yeah,
a libertarian movement, they just want to get along. They want to they want to legitimately discuss how to live together without authoritarianism. And many libertarians are not like that at all. And I think the religious libertarians get plenty of authoritarianism from their religion, and they don't want it anywhere else. So they're a lot nicer as a result, I think.
That is a great theory. And one thing, I think this is one of the, and I think this is also one of the puzzles with Christianity, because as you've told me about Mormons in East Germany, that some of these Christians are just, they're very much, have this attitude of bow down to authority, whatever the authority is. So if the government tells you to, do something silly, then you go do something silly because the government tells you to.
Yep.
There's no spirit of resistance, and I do think sometimes a lot of that's one of the issues with religion is it does kill people's spirit of resistance, or in a lot
Well,
of
it
people.
kills people's spirit of resistance, and when it's healthy, it gives them a sense of meaning. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a reason why Jews and Muslims are traditionally the jewelers and gold merchants, and it's because they live in a community that is so organized that you just do what you're told. I mean, if you're in a Jewish family or a Muslim family and your uncle hands you a little baggie of diamonds and says, hide these on your person and take them to the next city over, you're much more likely to do exactly as you're told because you're part of this very trust centric community. And outside of the really high trust, high demand religions, it's a
Yeah.
lot harder to get people to not abscond with your gold and jewels if they
Yeah.
have the chance.
Yeah, and I think that creates a problem there, because and sometimes I think that's part of the problem. Islam is, the religion of peace. I would say a lot of people in the Muslim world are mostly peaceful, but they
Oh,
allow
very
their
much.
society, they allow their societies to be taken over by these sociopaths, and they don't fight it,
Well,
and
do you know?
they allow
Okay,
these sociopaths to speak for them. They allow Bin Laden to speak for them and represent them. As like, no, there's no will to control the crazy people.
well, I don't know if you're aware of the demographics that have been afflicting the Muslim world. In North Africa, mosque attendance has collapsed in the last 30 years. The only people going to mosque are the die-hard conservatives.
Yeah.
All of the moderate and more liberal people in the communities in North Africa don't go to mosque anymore, and they don't talk religion anymore. And as a
Wow.
result, you just have a bunch of die-hard radicals. And so as Islamism loses hold of the hearts and minds of the people that it keeps hold of become much more radicalized. And as they see their religious community shrinking, they feel like the end of the world is coming because their world is actually ending. And so then they're much more likely to become radicalized and militant. It's not a sign of a growing danger. It's actually a sign of decline. And we're seeing that in the American political scene too. As more and more people leave the Democratic and Republican parties, the people who remain are getting a little more shrill, to,
That
to
that's
put it
true.
mildly.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. The yeah, that's true. The neutralizing influences are gone, because that explains why they're getting so bad. Yes, there are certainly a lot more people who don't identify with either party.
Yeah.
So
And the
yes,
paradox is that as the Muslim world gets wealthier, it becomes less Muslim and more violent. But the not more violent generally as a society, but those who stay hardcore Islamic are much more prone to violence because they see their world shrinking and they feel threatened and they feel like Armageddon is coming and they have to prepare and maybe go out and support people like Bin Laden or like Hamas.
the Christians don't feel like they need to support a Christian version of Bin Laden, though, which I find kind of interesting. Although I think I do wonder if that might be changing though in the next 10 or 20 years, though.
Christians are too wealthy.
Yeah.
The main difference in my mind, now I love philosophy, and
Yeah.
I can discuss the religious and political aspects of Islam and Christianity. I would say that the economic influence far outstrips any of the philosophical stuff. If the Muslim world was as rich as Europe, they would probably be very close to the same level of violence as Europe, as in very low.
But yeah, but also the violence is part of what's keeping them poor, though, too.
Oh yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And it's not keeping them poor though. The Muslim countries are actually growing in per capita GDP, and they've been growing very strongly for, well, since the end of World War I, since the last caliphate collapsed. The Muslim world, in fits and starts, has been growing economically, and they're getting stronger and stronger. And as they continue to grow in power, they will decline in violence. Now, Iran and, well, other than Iran, what Muslim countries are really going downhill? Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Lebanon. Those are the ones that are in the most trouble. But you look at Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, India,
Malaysia.
Malaysia, all of these Muslim countries, even when they have significant violent issues, they're all growing economically. And the more Muslims have jobs and families and homes, and they believe that there's a future for their kids, the less likely they are to pick up a gun, just like
Yeah.
people in the West.
This is yeah. This is the thing too, and I think a lot of these terrorists are, just young single males who don't have a family and don't really have much to live for besides themselves. It's like, they've done studies as the one thing they did if they wanted to stop terrorism is they found all the terrorists' girlfriends. And then
Yes, yes.
they had something to lose.
When you look at suicide bombers,
yeah,
suicide bombers are very rarely the oldest son. The oldest son gets married first.
yes,
And if you're not the oldest son, your opportunities for actually starting a family are lower. I mean, now, depending on where you're at, but in traditional Muslim homes, that, well, the homes of suicide bombers, the bombers themselves are always poor, and they're very rarely the firstborn son.
that's very interesting. Yes, I do wonder if there's still some elements where the firstborn son gets a lot more than the later sons. It's you know,
In tribal societies, it is still exactly
yeah.
the way it's been for thousands of years.
That was one thing, and while that the founding fathers were all vehemently against. I mean, they made it illegal that if when dad dies, dad can't leave everything to the first son and just say the heck with the rest of them. Dad, these estates or whatever have to be distributed. I don't know how they enforced that, but they saw that as a horrible evil, and I can understand why they did.
Yeah, it's not the best for society. Maybe it worked in the past. It doesn't work today. And really, in the West, it's not really relevant anymore because most people are already well established and have their families going before their parents die. I
Yeah,
mean, when it used to be that your parents
yeah,
would die in their 60s, maybe early 70s, and you'd get married at 16, somewhere between 16 and 22.
yeah. Hmm.
And by the time your parents died, they didn't spend all of their money trying to not die.
Yeah,
That's a very modern phenomenon where the last 10 years of your life you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on medical treatments to keep you from dying. Before the 1960s, there just wasn't anything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you go back and where you might die in your 40s or your 50s, and it was quite common to do that. You would get sick or whatever. It's a lot of things could happen. It was and you might not even live long enough to see your kids grow up. It's there's a lot of things like that can happen. It's definitely been a change. The whole thing with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, it's a. I think we probably talked enough about that, but it is very interesting to see what happens. I think she'll, she's on the schedule to speak at an objectivist conference next year, and I'm wondering if that's how that's going to go over now that she's decided to become a Christian. Uh, you know,
I if every Christian were like her, I would be very happy. I'll just
yeah,
say that.
there are a lot of good, there are a lot of good Christians out there. The other thing too is, although more recent news, I thought it was very, you know, I always say I want to congratulate anybody for living to 100. And Norman Lear got to 101, but boy, did he have an influence on American culture.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, the TV producer. I think
Yeah,
Norman Lear. He said what?
He started a lot of TV shows, and he appears to have had a lot of influence. I'm not sure how much influence he actually had.
Yeah, and I think he wanted people to have conversations. I don't think there was this sense of, and he wanted to show that everybody had some humanity. I mean, I mean, Archie Bunker is largely considered one of the greatest TV characters of all time, and here was the guy, and Archie would say some outlandish stuff, but Archie still had some basic humanity. He cared about his
Did
family.
you know that Cartman is modeled off of Archie Bunker?
Oh yeah, I can see that definitely. Eric Cartman.
Only he's a much worse version of Archie Bunker.
Well, yeah, and it also just seems worse because he's a little kid, not a big adult like Archie. It's
Well, that's what they said. They said you couldn't have an Archie Bunker today in 1997, but I bet you could do it if he was 8 years old.
and a cartoon.
Okay.
I think you can get away with more things in a cartoon.
Yeah.
And you got to remember too, though, going down the other way, George Jefferson was as much of a bigot as Archie Bunker was. He really, I mean, yeah, if you watch the Jeffersons, he definitely was.
Well, I think that in the very near future, we're going to come out of our silos a little bit, and we're going to be able to see interplay between different cultures and races in the United States that we've never seen before. Now, the United States, even with all of the discord that we have right now, it's still a melting pot. It's still such a pluralistic society where people from all corners of the planet, all walks of life, any kind of faith that is at least remotely reasonable can come and survive here. We're really doing amazingly well right now. And I think in the next 10 to 20 years, we are going to blossom in ways that people, frankly, wouldn't believe if I were to mention some of the things that I think will happen. For instance, I think black people will stop voting as a bloc for Democrats. That doesn't mean they're going to vote Republican. I think we might see some new political parties emerge. And I think Democrats are actually going to have to earn the votes of their core blocs if they want to continue to be relevant.
I definitely think that the only core block I think that they might maintain, Ed, is I think they are probably going to maintain single women, but that's about it.
That's they'll hold on to that one longer, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just so weird because have you heard about COVID amnesia?
No, I haven't. What about it?
There's this phenomenon where people can't remember what happened during COVID because they were locked down, they weren't going to work, and it was kind of like everybody went to jail for 3 years. And if you go to jail, in a lot of cases, nothing actually happens for 3 years, and therefore you can't remember anything that happened during those 3 years. And I think what COVID has done for the country, this amnesia, is it's like there's this story about Cortez landing in the New World, and
Yes.
he burned his ships so that they had to survive. And I feel
Yeah.
like COVID is kind of that situation. The
Yeah.
past is gone. We're never going back to 2019 or any time before that. We're in a dystopian anarchy now, and we're just going to have to make the best of it. And I think that's the feeling people have. And I think it's much better than what people are imagining. Everybody's really freaked out about the election next year. They're worried about every little thing. Is Russia going to start a nuclear war? Is the Middle East going to catch fire and burn down? Is the United States going to experience a civil war? There's a new movie. Barack Obama just put out a new movie. Do you know about it?
What's that about?
It's about civil war in the United States. It's I want to say it's Ethan Hawke and Julia Roberts and a couple of other big name stars. It's a just for Netflix movie. I haven't watched it. I just read a little blurb about it and watched the trailer for it. And basically, it's one of those movies where nobody knows what's actually happening. And there are Teslas crashing into each other on the freeway, and a super tanker runs aground on Long Island, and airliners are falling out of the sky. There's microwave attacks, and children are losing their teeth. It's just this attempt to show just how bad it could get, and I think it's an attempt to rile up Democrats to get them out to vote next year, because if Donald Trump wins, and this is what's going to happen. And I think it's going to backfire, because I think conservatives are much more likely to get riled up by this kind of a movie
Yes.
if they even bother to watch it. I don't think it's going to really catch on, though.
And Netflix, yes, the woke left network Netflix, yes. Uh,
It's crazy.
it really does. Yeah, it's good. I also saw this trailer for a movie coming out called the there's this movie coming out with the a movie coming out called the American Society of Magical Negroes, and it looks like it almost has to be a parody or a satire.
Oh,
If you look at
I watched the trailer for that today.
yes,
I watched the trailer for that today. It was made by the people who did In Living Color, and it is
yeah,
in
David, I know David Allen Greer is in it. Yes, I mean yeah, I mean yes,
everybody
the living
who has any racism in them is going to hate this movie. White
yeah,
racists, black racists, brown, yellow, whatever. If you have issues with race, you're going to hate this movie. And
and
I
when
don't
I
I don't
yeah
know. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not, but I'm going to watch it, and I am expecting to feel some
yeah
heat. I think it's
I
going to
don't
be a really, really good movie. I hope. I hope. I normally don't go in for these kinds of movies, but this one looks
yeah
like it's going to be hilarious, and it's going to cause meltdowns everywhere. I
and
hope it
it's
doesn't
gonna be
cause any riots. I don't think it'll cause any riots, but it's going to cause some controversy.
if you're losing it seems like a lot of people, and this is what the woke, they just want to lose the ability to laugh at anything, and this is I mean David Allen Greer, I don't think he would get involved. I mean, he would always do those characters on In Living Color, and uh, actually, I didn't. I only saw his name on it. I didn't see any other people on it, but maybe they're behind the scenes somewhere. But yes, if it's the Wayans brothers, that's great. But yeah, I kind of wondered what happened to those guys. But the
Well, they're
whole
back.
thing. And some of these people have done some really great stuff. Chappelle. I remember when Dave Chappelle did that parody where he had what they called the race draft, And so all these people were being
Yes.
drafted by various races, for example, like, and it starts out with, like Tiger Woods is now officially, it was
Yeah,
watching the
that
various
was.
races.
I think we might be coming back to that kind of humor. I think we've turned a corner, and we're moving into a new space where comedians are finding places where they can take the gag off. And the worst thing that you can do to a comedian is put a sock in their mouth. And for the past 5 or 6 years, comedians have really, really taken it in the teeth. And now that they're finding places to where they can go and speak freely, oh my goodness, they're going to go too far. And it's going to be funny. They're going to go completely bonkers.
I think when they just stop caring, they're going to go and really have fun with it. Yes, it could be very, it could be
Well,
very,
that's what the new Wayans Brothers
yeah,
movie is going to be, I think. I think they're just going to have as much fun as they can, and they're going to poke their fingers in as many eyes as possible at the same time. It's like, I didn't think you could piss off every type of racist out there at the same time, because normally it's going to cater to one type of them. But I think this particular movie is just going to piss them all at the same time. It's like
yeah,
maybe they're going to have to go into hiding to not get shot. I mean, hopefully not,
yeah.
because and maybe I'm building this movie up too much, but it looks like it's going to be really, really funny, and it's going to be very hard to watch for people who have racial animosity of any sort.
Yeah, I got to tell you though, I only see David Allen Greer. I don't see anybody else with the Wayans brothers on here. Maybe
I
they
could
just
be
hit.
wrong. I've only seen a little bit about it. I'm very busy right
Yeah,
now finishing up my screenplay and my manuscript, so
yes,
the little bits of pop culture that I get to see might be distorted.
yeah. I don't see that much pop culture either. I just don't. I've been
I got
spending too
better
much.
things to do. But this, I mean, normally I wouldn't care about the latest movie coming out, but I think I'm gonna
Yes,
go watch this, and I might even go see it in the theater instead of waiting for it to come out on on a streaming network.
yes.
It could be really, really fun. And if
Well,
it challenges me, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's just going to be funny though.
yeah, and of course it's also produced by Focus Features, so it's going to be that's going to be a Focus Features who also does a lot of Wes Anderson stuff and other things. I mean, I see
Maybe
Focus.
they'll take me out.
I immediately think of Wes Anderson, of course, and Moonrise Kingdom, which is one of the all-time great movies. Yeah, yeah, mm,
Very good stuff out there right now.
yes.
And
Looks like it.
I think this is all a sign that we're turning the
Yeah,
corner as a country,
yeah,
and we're going to see a little renaissance happen.
yes. It's going to premiere at Sundance, so and it's all going to do this in the election year. That should be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. I'm just, there was also that one movie where David Allen Greer played this character called Don No Soul Simmons. He was singing, but he had no soul. It was just,
I didn't see that. That sounds like it could
I
be
think it
pretty
was
funny.
I think it was called that movie was called Amazon Women on the Moon. It was a parody of television, and it had a lot of
Oh,
people. It was just making fun of people. Like there was this part where the guy's watching TV and he hits the remote, and then somehow he gets pulled into the television, and suddenly he's in the middle of a baseball field standing out. Yeah, they did a lot of zany comedy is just so yeah. We need more of it. It's yeah. It made me wonder. About what else has been going on lately with culture. It's I do wonder where uh, there is certainly a state of a need to be in the state of cataplexy about everything. It's like coronavirus, Vladimir Putin now, and I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It seems like they always need to have something to worry about.
oh yeah. People, there's something about humans where bad events help us more than good events in some ways. When you go through something bad, it affects your memory better than when you go through something good. Good times are just good, and you tend to have amnesia about good times.
Yes.
When something bad happens and you can do something about it, then you really develop a strong memory, and you can change bad habits into good habits. And I think coronavirus and all of this other craziness that's been going on, I think that's waking Americans up to the fact that we don't live on an island between the Atlantic and the Pacific anymore. We're part of the whole world, and maybe we need to get off our butts and get moving. I mean, do you know what the GDP numbers were last quarter?
No, I don't know what those numbers were.
5.2% growth, third quarter GDP for the United States. We haven't been there since the 80s.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty high.
it looks like we're going to be reshoring a lot of manufacturing, and it's going to give us, and that's where this GDP boost is coming from. A lot of it is coming from new manufacturing plants. San Antonio, I want to say, not Intel, who is it? Samsung. I want to say Samsung. I could be wrong here. Samsung is opening a new microchip factory there. 2 million square feet. 2 million square feet.
In
That's a
San
big factory.
Antonio?
It could be in San Antonio. I thought it was Austin, but I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know.
Well, yeah, they have a big presence here in Austin, so yes.
Yeah, and we're reshoring so much manufacturing. We're going to see very high GDP growth probably for the next 5 to 10 years. And with the new CRISPR tools coming out, some of the new AI stuff, the robotics, the SpaceX, the crypto world, for instance, all of these things are coming together in what looks like it might be a perfect storm. And we could see an economic expansion unlike anything the world has ever seen or even dreamed about. This is actually where Klaus Schwab and the WEF got their bright idea about you will own nothing and you will like it, because they see the fourth industrial revolution coming, and they think the private sector isn't up to handling it, and government needs to come in and organize the fourth industrial revolution, or we're just going to get chaos and anarchy and civilization is going to collapse. Now, I don't agree. I feel like the private sector is going to handle the fourth industrial revolution just fine, and we're going to transform the world in ways that nobody can even imagine.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you always have a way of really looking for optimistic possibilities and making a good case for those optimistic possibilities.
Have I told you how I build my best case? How I build my best fit for the future?
Maybe
I
I.
actually I actually put myself in the position of an evil genius trying to destroy the planet. And then I look out there and look for things in my way. It's like, okay, I want to kill everybody. What's in my way? And when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, okay, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Okay, take on the role of the devil. You're now Satan, and you're trying to take the world to hell in a handbasket. Who's in your way? And when you look at the world that way, it's really scary. If you're trying
Yeah.
to drag the world down and destroy it, there are so many things that are going to come kick your ass. I mean, if nothing else, look at the level of technology that we have right now. And if technological advancement were to cease today, what we have still has to percolate through the entire globe, bring the entire world up to the technological level of the United States. How long is that going to take? What is that going to do to the planet?
Yeah, that's a good point. It'd probably take. Oh, I don't want to know how long it'll take.
Yeah, and we're just going to, but we're not going to stop with our innovation. We're going to keep moving forward. And in some cases, smaller, less developed countries are going to leapfrog us. Africa probably isn't going to develop major power lines everywhere. They're probably going to have small modular reactors, some solar, some wind, some geothermal, and they're going to get their internet from Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. There will be a few fiber optic cables, but why do you need it if you've got really good cell service and satellite internet? And a lot of these countries are just going to leapfrog developmental stages that the West had to muddle through and figure out. I mean, that's one of the reasons why China has been able to grow so impressively over the last 50 years. It's because the West already showed them how to do it. And the rest of the world is following China's example. And as an evil genius looking to destroy the world, I'm really depressed. When I get into my evil genius mode and I look out there, I'm really depressed at my chances because it just keeps getting harder every single day. What's an evil genius going to do? How can I find enough useful idiots to join my army when everybody's got these smartphones? And when I put out propaganda, they just look it up and they go, no, no, that's crap, that's crap. Sure, they still don't believe the truth, but it's really hard to come out with effective propaganda these days. I mean, look at what's happening with Democrats and Republicans when they try to build a coherent narrative, and it just gets shredded before it even gets off the ground. It's insane. So, my evil genius persona is just really depressed. Just doesn't know what to do. I mean, maybe try and get Russia to pop a nuke, but Russia can't even maintain their nukes. China, my favorite video about that is the myth of Chinese missiles. And basically, there are some expats from China saying that the Chinese nuclear arsenal is much smaller than they say. And the same about the Russians. Russian missiles last for about 10 years and then they have to be rebuilt. When's the last time Putin rebuilt his entire nuclear arsenal? I'm pretty sure he hasn't done it 3 times in the last 30 years. So, as an evil genius looking for weapons and help, it's hard. It's hard.
Yes, but our the news media wants to engage in as much scaremongering as possible, so that they have to say all these things are sides. Yes, we have to create a boogeyman. They're going to kill us.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Well, that's how media's always acted. They've always looked for the boogeyman, and now news media is dying. Every few months, you get a big headline story about the Washington Post slashing 10% of its staff. And this isn't coming off of all-time high staffing. This is coming off of very low staffing, and they're just cutting it down to the bone. The LA Times, the New York Times, everybody in the media is just getting butchered. I mean, The Guardian, every time I read a Guardian article, there's this pop-up saying, please donate money to us to help protect the world from Musk and all these evil billionaires. I never thought I would see the day when major publications were begging for donations. And yeah, the media does some pretty horrible things. And very, very horrible things are happening to the media right now. Who's the biggest newscaster out there right now? Joe Rogan? He's not mainstream media. What about Tucker? What about all the people who are disseminating news out there in any big way? They're not legacy media. Legacy media is really suffering. Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
One way to put it.
Yeah, it's really crazy that they allowed this to happen, but I think they just lost this self-awareness and they just became more and more disconnected from the public, and
I don't see any way they could have stopped it. I mean, the news media was what it was because of how hard it was to collect and process information. And as it has gotten easier and cheaper to collect and process information, there was no chance for legacy media to survive. I mean, some of the stations will survive, the New York Times will survive, They are not going to survive in the format that they were in the 80s. I mean, that era is gone. Those media institutions, even if the names still exist, the institution from the 80s at NBC and CBS, they don't exist anymore.
But just seeing how things have evolved, I mean, I can remember watching Cronkite's last show, and I had this sense that I was watching something really important. And
Yeah,
looking
but he
back,
was
it
an
was
evil
really
piece of garbage.
Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite was an evil piece of garbage, and he hid it extremely well because people couldn't see what was actually happening. He was horrible.
Why? I don't know. They called him the most trusted man in America. Why are you saying that about Cronkite? I mean,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was the most trusted man in America. And since when should you trust? Okay. Okay. Let's dial it back a little bit. During his reign as the most trusted man in America, who was in charge of the FBI?
J. Edgar Hoover was for a while.
No, the entire time. J. Edgar Hoover outlasted Cronkite, didn't he? Or did Cronkite outlast Hoover by a few years? There was
Hoover
significant
died in the
overlap.
70s or something. There
Cronkite
was overlap.
Cronkite cut his teeth while Hoover was in charge of the FBI, and he was in the tail of his career when Hoover died, I believe. And Hoover,
Hoover died in 1972.
yeah, the year I was born. And when did Cronkite retire?
81.
81. So he had 9 years free. The final 9 years of his career, he was free of J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover was more powerful than the President of the United States. By the end of World War II, he was more powerful than the president, and nobody did nothing without J. Edgar's say-so in this country. He could destroy you that easily. Are you aware that Ronald Reagan was an informant for Hoover?
Ronald Reagan was an
Ronald
informant for Hoover.
Reagan.
What do you?
He was an informant for J. Edgar Hoover when he was in the Screen Actors Guild. I want to say it was when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild or something. He was informing on people to Hoover.
That they were allegedly communist or whatever.
Hoover didn't. Hoover cared about a lot more than just communism. Let's just say he had some very interesting files that that conveniently never surfaced once he died. So either somebody secreted them away, burned them, or they were lost in some underground vault that nobody knew where it was except for Hoover. I don't know. I don't particularly care. But Hoover ran things. He ran just about everything. And Reagan was only allowed to become governor because Hoover said it was okay. Hoover could have destroyed him. Hoover could have destroyed Cronkite. There's nobody during the 50s and 60s that did anything without kissing Hoover's ring first. Nobody important.
Oh wow.
And I'll send you some stuff about Cronkite. He wasn't the worst guy out there, but he wasn't great. He was not a good person. He did some pretty horrible things, and he pushed his own political agenda using broadcasting. He pretended to be neutral, and he pushed an agenda. That's pretty horrific right there, in my opinion.
But he's a whole lot better than Dan Rather. I mean, who came after him? I mean, I see some of
But
these
Dan Rather was
tweets.
a lot smaller too.
What?
Dan Rather had to share the stage with a lot of other people.
But Dan Rather was the CBS news anchor after Cronkite.
Dan Rather was. I don't know if he was worse than Cronkite. It was a different era. Cronkite was the man. Dan Rather was one of the men. And then after Dan Rather went down in flames, I mean, that's media was already bleeding pretty bad when Dan Rather went down. But Dan Rather actually got taken down. Cronkite never got taken down for his bad behavior.
I don't remember.
Yeah. If you remember, I mean, it's fiction, but I would say that, oh, what's his name? Gail Wynand is a pretty good simulacrum of William Randolph Hearst. And
Yes.
I mean, just look at what Hearst did and how he treated the country, and then look at the people who took over after Hearst. And were they just all sweetness and light? Did they blow the lid on all the horrible stuff that Hearst did? No. Oh, then maybe they weren't that great themselves. And it's like the FBI. When did the FBI ever reform itself after Hoover? Still
Never.
waiting. Still waiting.
Yeah.
Guilty until proven innocent. If you're an individual working in the private sector, innocent until proven guilty. When you're part of the government and you're part of a government apparatus, it's guilty until proven innocent. You do not get an assumption that you're a good person doing good things just because you work for the government. It should be the exact opposite. And for somebody of Cronkite's stature, under the thumb of people like Hoover, you got to assume that they're dirty until proven otherwise. And there's plenty of evidence that he was very dirty. It's just he had a good image. He had a good makeup crew.
He had a good voice.
Yes, he did. He was very handsome. He knew the right things to say and how to say them, which makes him more of a cheerleader than a news broadcaster. And if you remember Monica Lewinsky and how that story broke, CBS spiked the story, and then Matt Drudge got a hold of it and ran with it. Had it not been for the internet, Monica Lewinsky would not be a household name.
Oh yes, Drudge. Yes. What is that's something I thought of. What is Drudge up to? I haven't heard his name in a
Oh
while.
man, that Moonbat is just a psycho. I mean, I don't know that he's worse than Cronkite, but hey, he certainly put a stake in the heart of a few vampires. But he's a crazy Moonbat vampire hunter. I have no idea what he's up to. He let go of the Drudge Report. He turned it over to a crew or something. And so he I don't know what he's doing. I don't really care. I tried to listen to his show once or twice, but he just sounded crazy. Just completely bonkers.
I suppose he got enough money anyway that he doesn't really have to do much of anything anyway.
He was at his peak, he was probably netting more than $1 million a day. So he's got more money than he could spend, is my assumption. Who knows? People can burn through a lot of money when they're irresponsible.
I mean, March '95, he had 1,000 subscribers. By '97, he had 85,000 subscribers. He just went. He got more stuff out there and just
Yep, and then it just went up from there.
Yeah. Yeah, he did a lot of things.
And I would say that case is a good example of what media was like before the internet. Just the dirty stuff just never got out.
Yeah, I do have to wonder. That's a good point about Monica Lewinsky. Would it have gotten out at all?
Well, we know what the Kennedys were up to. We know what the Kennedys were up to on Cronkite's watch. You think Cronkite didn't know?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Covered for it.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting career, covering for these people. I do wonder how that all worked out. Cronkite. Yeah, so where, and one thing else too that's been interesting, the whole, spat with Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. What do you make of that?
Oh, I'm barely aware of it. I like that people can get out there and speak their mind, I believe that people like Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro, and even who are some good examples of people on the left who are similar, like Cenk Uygur and oh come on, I can't, because we're talking, I can't remember the guy's name, but there are a lot of people out there who are as honest as they can be and maintain their audience. I think there are
Yes.
certain things that people know are true and they downplay it or they discount it because their audience doesn't want to hear it. And I'm not going to blame them for doing that. I mean, you got to eat, you got to know where your bread's buttered. And Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, Cenk Uygur, all of these podcasters and political pundits, they're more they make more money when they stir the pot. And that makes it harder for me to trust what they actually say. I mean, even if they are honest people trying really hard and they never tell lies, you can stir the pot without telling lies. You can cause all sorts of mischief and misdirection telling the truth all the time, especially if you're catering to your audience. Because the audience, it's just an animal. I mean, each individual is a human being, but when you get an audience of a few thousand people together or a few million people together, you've got an unthinking, emotional train wreck on your hands. And anybody who can make that emotional train wreck dance, they're not giving you accurate information. Sometimes they are, but you can't trust them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, I think we'll probably see more people doing independent work. I mean, Candace
And
Owens.
that's the best because they'll take each other down when they spot somebody, when they spot bad behavior on the other side, they'll call them out.
Yeah. Candace Owens could, yeah, it's interesting too because a lot, the whole thing about it, the whole Israel thing, it's really been interesting. And I've heard several people in the more conservative area, point this out. Oh, some of these rich people that says, oh, I'm going to stop giving money to Harvard, I'm going to stop giving money to whatever college, and a lot of these, some of these conservative pundits like Matt Walsh have said these universities have been doing lots of horrible things for a long time, and this is what it took to pull the money out. They didn't care that they were, been demonizing, men for 30 years, but now they suddenly care that
Oh,
this is
men have
happening.
been demonized for 2 million years.
Yeah.
I think men being demonized is actually one of the things that helps make society a better place.
Yeah, but
I
I'm
am
I'm
a man.
pointing I'm pointing the fact
Hmm?
that they're pushing all this politically correct nonsense, and all these big donors didn't care, but now that suddenly there's some anti-Israeli sentiment on these campuses, that they're suddenly pulling stuff out.
Oh, when it all settles down, okay, men have been bashed for as long as there's been language, and even before. I mean, it's nothing new, and I don't think it's bad because as
Yeah,
men we tend to be a little more testosterone, punch first, ask questions later. Maybe we need to be heavily criticized in order to keep us in line. Women get criticized a lot too. The criticism against women is generally a little more implicit.
yeah,
It's a little more shadow conspiracy behind the curtain. Men can be attacked out in the open because that's what who we are. That's what we do. We tend to make our messes out in the open, so we get criticized in the open. Women tend to be a little more
you're,
circumspect, a little more cautious, so when they make messes, the criticism generally stays pretty low key, but it still happens and it's still real and it still has teeth. And criticism is a big part of how society moves forward. And in the last 30 years, there's been a lot of attacks on men, but I don't see those attacks any different when I look back at the writings of Chekhov in the late 19th century, or when I read the early 20th century stuff, like what's his name? Whales weep not.
Okay,
Oh,
you're completely missing my point here.
oh, I'm sorry.
My point is the behavior of academia and why academia's in and their reprehensible behavior was never a problem before October 7th.
Oh, and it'll go back to normal as soon as this dies down.
Yeah, I
The,
mean,
the academy is fatally flawed and always has been for over 1,000 years.
yeah,
And I don't see any indication that the fundamentals that create those flaws are going to change.
yeah,
As soon as the current anti-Semitism dies down, the academy is going to go back to just what it's always been doing for 2,000 years plus.
what is that exactly?
The academy is full of resentment. See, if you want to go back to the Middle Ages,
Yeah,
which is where all this started. I mean, look at a graduation. Look at what they're wearing at graduation. Those are not modern clothes. The university system emerged from the Catholic Church. And when you were a noble 500, 1,000 years ago, and you had a series of sons, the oldest son inherited, and the next son got sent into the priesthood.
yes,
And when you get sent into the priesthood, yeah, you can still go have sex, but you can't get married, you can't have a family, you can't do anything like that. You get to watch your older brother out there riding horses and shooting bows and jousting and sleeping with every girl he can get and getting all the gold and all the great food. You get really resentful when you're watching that. It's like, what? Because he's 2 years older than me, he gets all that, and I have to go join the priesthood? And the
yes,
academy emerged from the priesthood. Academics don't build anything. They don't do anything. They're not rock stars. They just sit there and they lecture kids all day. They don't become Elon Musk. They don't become, I was going to say Kanye West, but he's kind of a train wreck right now. They don't become Jay-Z or Beyonce or Taylor Swift. They just get to stand on the sidelines and criticize everything, and it eats them up inside. There is more resentment in the academy than in politics or sports or industry or the military because they have no real power, which is why they sit back there and they just criticize everybody viciously. And they do everything that they can to control society, but they don't and they never will. And as a result, individual academics can be good people. There are some great college professors out there. I had some amazing professors when I was in college. I also saw some really, really horrible people there too. And the academy is just a breeding ground for poisonous resentment. And it always will be. Nothing's going to change because in the future, people in the academy are not going to go out and start factories or run for president or become generals in the military. They're very different career tracks. You don't get rich as a professor. You can get comfortable, but you're not going to make millions and millions of dollars as a run of the mill college professor. And then when you think you're smarter than everybody else and you know all these wonderful things, but there's all these people out there getting the girl and making the money and making big splashes in the world, that just eats you up inside. And then you just become resentful and poisonous. And that's never going to change. And as a result, the problems that we have with the academy today, they're just going to go in a little cycle. They're going to go up a little bit and then down, up and down, but it's just the same poisonous mess the entire time. It's just not going to change.
wow.
There's some optimism for you.
This is, this is real. This really explains a lot, though, and we're all wondering why do these people act the way that they do? And as you said, it's just a breeding ground for resentment. And that's why they love socialism, because socialism is the politics of resentment. It's about envy. It's a
You
and
take the money away from the successful people and give it to me.
yeah, destroy the
That's
success
socialism.
and it's always ends up, and it's not about building anybody else. It's just about tearing people down. And as James Lindsay pointed out, he said this is also, that socialism is about sloth and envy. Uh, Conservatism is about fear and desperation, and liberty is about faith and free faith and faith and reason. It's but it does make
I would say liberty and conservatism are about hard work and getting results. And the academy, you don't work hard. You might work your brain hard, but you don't work hard physically. You spend all of your time sitting on your butt in a chair with your nose in a book. And that doesn't feel good. You know what feels good? Going out, chopping down a tree, building a fence, all that kind of stuff. It's physically stimulating, and you feel really good when you're doing that kind of a work. But when you've got I love reading, I love studying. I spend most of my time sitting in a chair with my nose in a book. It's not as physically rewarding as working outside, digging a ditch, of all things. People like to look down on people who dig ditches, but digging a ditch, you build some nice muscles, you get some really good endorphins, and then the chicks, they look at your muscles and they go, hey, oh wait, you're poor. But at least they look at you and they admire your physique. If you're an academic, you don't have the money, you don't have the muscles, the chicks just laugh at you. It's just a resentful pit.
I don't know. Construction workers have certainly talked about, that they do kind of have a reputation, that sometimes they sometimes they'll have groupies and stuff like that.
Construction workers get a lot of chicks.
Yeah, I mean, because there is something and it is it. Yeah, I think there, and this is another thing too, Ed, and I think maybe this is part of the problem. This is a mistake I made. Michael Phelps did not win all the probably never read a single book about swimming, but he won all those gold medals because he got in the pool and just swam hours and hours and hours
all day, and then he got out, took a nap for a few hours, got up, and jumped back in the pool.
Yeah,
fish.
Yeah, he didn't become great because he read books. He became great because he went out and did it. I mean, there's no substitute for experience. Now I certainly maybe he probably studied some film and maybe stuff like that. Watching other swimmers swim, seeing how they swim, maybe watch and certainly in sports that is common for a lot of athletes to watch film and see what other people are doing. But the whole point is you don't become great by spending all your time in a classroom or even spending all your time reading books. You get good by going out there and doing it. And life is education.
Alexander the Great read a lot of books, but he never wrote any.
Yeah.
And he read a lot of books because Aristotle was his professor. And you could do a lot worse than Aristotle.
Also, it's interesting too, though, because some academics, I think, and here we have we recently have a case of an academic who was also the lead singer of a Rolling Stone cover band, and this guy got on TV, made a lot of noise, and now he's the president of Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
Javier Milei, I know you wanted to talk about that, and I think there's a whole lot of things here to talk about, and I've done tons of shows about Senor Presidente Milei. So,
yeah, he's a very interesting cat. We'll have to see whether he can put up as much as he talks. And it looks like he's got a decent chance at it. I mean, if he can do what he says he wants to do to Argentina, if he can do half of it, Argentina is going to become an industrial and agricultural powerhouse. And if he does that, then people will want to imitate him.
That's definitely a possibility that people will want to imitate him. Yes, I think there's.
Well, look at it from this very boring angle.
Yes.
Let's say he accomplishes dollarization in Argentina. What that means is that the Argentine government will not be able to levy a hidden tax through inflation. The Federal Reserve will put a hidden tax on Argentina through inflation, but the Argentine central bank will not be able to do that. And what that means is that Argentina will be on a level playing field with the United States without the baggage of the United States. They won't have to have a giant army, navy, huge diplomatic corps, all this other stuff. If Argentina actually has to balance its budget every year and they can't levy hidden taxes on the population, they're a first world country. I mean, you can put labels on it any way you want, but they have nuclear power plants. And in my book, that makes them a first world country. And if they have to balance their budget every year, their industry is going to turn into a dynamo. Their agriculture and heavy industry will just take off. And not only will it take off, everybody who wants to make money is going to want to invest in Argentina. And companies are going to want to open factories in Argentina. So not only will Argentine industry be doing okay because their government will be less of a leech, everybody else on the planet is going to want to make money there. And billions will pour in the next 2 years, I think. If he pulls off dollarization, you're going to see hundreds of billions of dollars flood into Argentina from capital markets all around the world.
That would be very interesting. Yes, I think bringing in investment can certainly make a difference, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts people. He's already,
the Falkland Islands actually want to join Argentina because it's better than the UK. That's down the road a ways, though.
But the one thing that's interesting, you have a case where a libertarian politician was explicitly anarcho-capitalist, going out there, ran for the Chamber of Deputies 2 years ago, got in there, and then ran for president. I mean, first of all, we have a libertarian right now who's never lost an election. This is alone an accomplishment there.
That's not a libertarian. I have never heard of a libertarian like that. Libertarians do the exact opposite. They never win elections. They don't never lose.
And really, I'm wondering, what does this say about him, and what does this say about the American Liberty Movement? Because I'm more and more convinced that this could not happen. And there are other reasons too, I think, because of how rigged the system is. But I don't think this could happen here, even if the system wasn't rigged the way it's rigged.
Oh, I agree. Argentina was so broken. The only way he was able to get there was because of 140% inflation.
Yeah.
The United States would have to get that bad. But the biggest problem in my mind with the Libertarian Party is that anytime a libertarian gets traction, they go into the private sector and start a business. There are a few exceptions, but so many libertarians just go into private industry because it works better.
I really think in many respects, the American Libertarian Party, when I got involved, and I first got involved in the 90s, which I think really was the peak of the Libertarian Party. And it definitely was the peak as far as membership goes. There was over 30,000 members at the time. And I think that fell off a cliff after the World Trade Center, but there was still seemed to kind of be this attitude that we're just okay doing what we're doing. And, if we just continue to get 1% or 2% of the vote every year, that's fine. As it's like what happens with organizations. You, instead of focusing on the goal of the organization, you focus on the organization itself. And that's created a lot of, finger pointing and resentment. It's like, well, why aren't we doing better? Why? Because everybody asks, why aren't we winning? Why aren't we winning? It's, you end up with all this bickering over why we're losing all the time instead of winning. And I don't think it.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, and the Libertarian Party has always been in that same rut. And I don't know if it's ever going to get out of it. I don't know if it can. I think America would have to get a lot more broken before libertarianism can really pick up traction.
Yeah.
Because Democrats and Republicans both carry a lot of very liberty-loving planks. And until they break those planks, it's a lot harder for libertarianism to get traction in the United States.
Well, I also think with how the system is rigged, I think it doesn't help either. I mean,
Oh, no,
Argentina
no, no,
looks
no, no. The
fairly.
Democrats and Republicans have such a corrupt lock on elections that it's very easy to legally crush any opposition, because
Yeah.
it's just the arbitrary rules favor a two-party system in our setup, and that just means bad news for any third parties. And
And
the corruption inside those systems, all it has to do is lean on that structure and support that structure, and then nobody can get any traction.
I don't know if this corrupt system exists anywhere else in the world either. I don't think it does.
No, no, not to my knowledge. The two-party system in the United States is fairly unique, and in other countries you have a lot more of a parliamentarian style, where you end up with coalition governments with 12 different political parties or more, and
Yes.
that creates a more democratic system. And I don't know if that would work here. I mean, I'd be open to giving it a try. I'm just not very focused on politics myself.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely not. It's a and I don't think with all the silly drama in the liberty movement, I don't think it could produce a melee. I think there's too many people who want to complain and issue their grievances and just don't want to. They don't want to focus on winning. They want to complain. You
You'd
know,
need to have a charismatic person who was charismatic before they joined the Libertarian Party, and then if they jumped in, then you could get something happen. I agree with you when you say you don't see the Libertarian Party developing somebody like a Javier Milei. He'd have to incubate outside of the Libertarian Party.
yeah, yeah, and well, that's what he did. He built his brand before he went into politics,
Yes.
and that's the key fact here. And but I don't know if he tried to build the brand. I think he'd probably have to build a new party from scratch. I don't think he could do it with the current way it is, just because there's so much. I don't know, just so much institutional rot there that I don't know if he could possibly fix it, even if he tried to mount a takeover or something of it. I think he would still end up with. But there's lots of difficulties, But you have talked about you have a screenplay coming out. What's going on with that?
So this is actually pretty closely related to Javier Milei. My
Yeah.
screenplay is called The Bitcoin Conspiracy,
Yes.
and it talks about economics, really. Now,
Yeah.
I've read a few economics texts, and they're not the most exciting textbooks in the world. And I don't understand why they're so dry. As I
So that.
decided to write a spy novel about
Yes.
economics. And
Yes.
what I've realized is, as far as the screenplay is concerned, it's kind of light on the education. The novel's a little heavier on the education. All
Yeah.
of the major planks of economics feed directly into a good international spy novel. It's all about money and industrial capacity and maybe some high-tech secret or something. I mean, it just fits into a spy novel perfectly. You don't have to create some kind of weird conspiracy. There are plenty of true conspiracies that are fully documented and wide out in the open, like the military industrial complex and money going to, well, the way money gets made, the way we use inflation to erode value. And in the Bitcoin conspiracy, I have a young girl who actively hates and resists learning about money. She comes from an upper middle class background, and she gets thrown into it because she happens to be dating a banker who gets blown up. And then all sorts of people begin chasing her because they think that he gave her some very valuable keys. And as the story progresses, she has to learn about what her boyfriend was up to, what these spies and gangsters and federal agents are up to. And she learns a little bit as she's getting chased around. And it's just a nice little spy thriller adventure where you have helicopters and explosions and airplanes and tunnels and all sorts of craziness going on. And it's really exciting. Economics should be exciting. Economics is exciting. If you want to talk about a conspiracy, I'm being facetious here, but I could build a very strong case that there's a conspiracy on the part of economics professors to keep people ignorant about economics. It's just exciting.
A conspiracy to be boring. A conspiracy to write impossible books that you have to, be college level to read. I mean, I don't know about that yet. So.
Yeah, you don't need to be college level to understand economics.
Yeah.
What's so hard about understanding that if there's $100 in the economy and 100 apples, an apple costs $1, and if the government prints an extra $100, suddenly that apple costs $2, and the government just taxed half of your apples. I mean, that's really simple. It's really straightforward. It's that short, that sweet. That's the foundation of Keynesian economics right there. And don't even get me started on modern monetary theory.
I don't want to get started on modern monetary theory. It's a travesty in all its own.
Our current system is based on the idea that the people who have power make better decisions than the people who don't have power. I mean, we have the power. Of course, we're smarter and better than you. So give us all your money. It's like that doesn't fly. And
Yes,
economics should be focused on explaining it.
And that we're omniscient and omniscient, and we know everything, and therefore we can create the world. It kind of reminds me. What do you think about?
Ignore that we spent $5 trillion flattening Central Asia and got nothing out of it.
Yes, for example, what do you think of this, gentleman who goes by the name of Yuval Noah Harari? I mean, I think he's the most dangerous terrorist in the Middle East.
I've read his books. I was not impressed. I liked some of the technology he talked about.
Yeah.
I felt like he pretends to be a scientist when in reality he's just a political activist who thinks he's better than everybody and people should do what he says.
How is it that we have systems that allow psychopaths and sociopaths like this to get into positions where they can do a lot of damage? Ideally, in an ideal world, Harari would just be would probably just be a college professor somewhere and just be relatively harmless. But this is a guy who can do a serious amount of damage right now.
Well, the reason why people like him can do damage really comes back to the Bitcoin conspiracy and Javier Milei. When you have a Federal Reserve or a central bank that can print a lot of money, that money is used to stimulate the economy by giving it to people who will support the regime. And the regime is not necessarily the Republicans or the Democrats. The regime is the bureaucracy. Now, you can put a nice, pretty, scary name on it like the deep state, but the deep state is just the bureaucracy. And we've had bureaucracy for 6,000 years, and we need it. The bureaucracy is important. The problem is that when you give the bureaucracy unlimited money-making privileges, they make an unlimited amount of money and give most of it to themselves. And they give it to people who, like academics, who will give very convincing reasons to keep the bureaucracy in power. And the only way to fix it is to come up with a money supply that is not controlled by the bureaucracy of the United States or the European Union or the Chinese Communist Party. And as soon as we have a stable source of money, that short circuits government. You're going to see the cancer of this giant bureaucracy heal. It's not going to go away. We need the bureaucracy. We just don't need as much as we've got. We could probably do with 10%, maybe even 5% of what we've got. We don't need this giant octopus of bureaucratic officials who are mostly incompetent running the world. We don't need that. But as long as government can print the money, they're going to be in charge. And that's where people like this man, I don't want to say his name, that I don't want to give free publicity to the academics who support and prop up this institution, except the ones who are already dead, like Keynes. These people are getting paid money to say, no, these people should keep control of the money.
Yeah.
And until we can take that control away, it's going to stay like this. And Javier Milei is our best shot right now.
And
Bitcoin is the second best shot.
I think I was saying it could be the most important election in the history of the world.
I am blown away that they let him win. I mean, it was a mess. The Peronists didn't want it. The conservatives didn't want it. Nobody wanted that job. And so you have this crazy lunatic waving a chainsaw come in and says, I want it. It's like, all right, let's let him have it, because then we can blame him.
And I've now
done. If that's what it takes. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
And I've done at least 30 shows talking about this guy with various people.
He's a lunatic. There are some things about him that are just lunacy, but he's got some really good ideas that could really work. And that's more than you can say about the Peronists.
And he's already cut the government more in 36 hours than Eisenhower, Reagan, Nixon, Ford, and the Bushes did in 36 years.
We'll see how well the top-down fiat actually gets through the system. He said he's slashing it. Can he actually implement it? And I really hope so. I think he's got a good chance of it. And I think that's where we're at. It's a really exciting time to be alive. So many amazing things coming down the road right now. Some of them aren't going to, some of them are going to fall through. But there's so many. At least one's got to hit.
Yeah, and I think, and it certainly makes me want to go visit there. So maybe I'll do that soon. And I've talked to people. I've talked to people who are his friends or were his friends. It's pretty phenomenal what's going on here. Maybe it will inspire other people to work harder, since he's working harder and he realizes he puts them to shame. It's been great. It's certainly been great talking to you here, and we've gone over 2 hours. So I think it's a good time to cut it off. Of course, I have my 50 show rule, so that means you won't be back for a while. But
thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's almost always it's usually a good conversation with you, because you have a lot of different things we can talk about, and I just want to cover various topics and go over those topics. I don't know if there's any other good topics maybe we could talk about
when I launch the book and the screenplay. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah. Well, if I'm at 196 or higher,
all right.
Yeah. And I don't know. I also don't know. If we want to say anything about Christmas, since we're 9 days away from Christmas, and hopefully I'll have this show up and edited by then. But who knows? Yeah.
All right. Well, good luck with that. And good luck with you
too. Yeah, thank you very much. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out my novel, Escape from the Village. I also have a Substack. This is the end of Fountainhead Forum 145. Thank you, Ed Hoefer. I'm Chris Baker, and we are stopping the recording. Bye-bye.